So Sheikh, today I am going to
Yeah.
be working on my laptop in the background for FES. Just
Okay.
things. Oh, 1 second, Sheikh. Okay. Okay. I'm just going to send the link out, Sheikh, to parents.
Yep.
So they can then join. It's easy for them to join us via YouTube if they, if they can't do Zoom.
Yep.
And then after that, we can start after a few minutes, inshallah.
Perfect. Perfect.
So, Sheikh, just to let you know, I have put the link up and sent it to parents. So they will be with us now in a few moments. At the same time, just to let you know that YouTube is about 30 seconds behind. So that's another thing. So there might be a few questions that might be slightly delayed, but we'll kind of bring them together as well.
And we'll allocate time for that.
No, that's fine. Are you going to be using a PowerPoint?
Yeah.
Okay.
At some point, potentially. Depends on how our discussion goes.
That's fine, inshallah. That's cool. Right, so inshallah, yeah, so we're just waiting for another 3 minutes or so, and then we will be started, inshallah. So if anyone's joined us on YouTube, you have any questions straight away, do go ahead, inshallah. You don't need to wait.
I'm liking the background, Sheikh.
Thank you, Sheikh. Cool.
Okay, mashallah. Laiba's joined us. Assalamu alaikum, Laiba.
Close the door. So inshallah, for those of you who are joining us now live on YouTube as well and Zoom, we will be starting in under 2 minutes. Ustad Nasheen is live with us on YouTube. So assalamu alaikum, Ustad Nasheen. And I've got Baraka here who's joined me live in real life, right in front.
No social distancing required, yeah?
Yep.
Sheikh, I don't think we can see Baraka because of your background.
All right, let me remove that.
You can definitely hear her though, mashallah.
Yep. Excuse me, Baraka, look. Baraka, look. Come here. Oh, she's gone, she's run off.
That's fine, Sheikh.
All right. Yep, and 1 more minute and then we're ready to go, Sheikh. So it says, Ustad Nashina said there is a slight whistling sound in the background. I think that was Baraka, Ustad Nashina. But now she's gone. So just to let you know, inshallah, Sheikh, I will most likely have my mic muted. If at any time you need me to speak, I'll turn it on and I'll be there. Otherwise, you'll keep on hearing Baraka in the background.
Yeah, I think the whisper that there might be some cooking or something going on from my end as well. I'm not sure.
Oh, okay, interesting. Well, that's interesting. That's all right. We can't do anything about that. But yeah, I'm just going to keep mine on mute. And then whenever you need me, I'm here. I might be doing a few things in the background. But yeah. And when you're ready, Sheikh, I think we can start.
Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. So Sheikh, yeah, just from my end, some interesting developments. So the people who were listening last week would have heard that, you know, I do go into schools as part of my daily job, but as you know, schools are closed at the moment. And as part of my role within the NHS, I could be redeployed, or a very strong chance I would be redeployed to be working within almost the front line, should we say, so within the hospital service, Sheikh. So we might have to rename this live with Ustad Daniel from the front line, Sheikh. Sheikh, you're still muted, by the way, but so other people can't hear you.
Yeah, that sounds good, Sheikh. That sounds good. I like that.
Yeah. So also within my remit as a speech and language therapist, also we work with sort of vulnerable people who've had strokes and maybe head and neck cancer, anything to do with sort of the throat and the mouth. So I won't be directly working with COVID patients, but the ones who, there's a new ward in Goodmayes that's been opened up specifically just for these patients, essentially, who would be ready to go to community but are not ready yet. So that would have been my sort of general role, Maulana. For today, what I wanted to talk about was just sort of general attitudes towards SEN. I think firstly, sort of within the greater community, and then a little bit more closely and do a bit more of an introspective look at what's happening within sort of the Muslim community as well, Sheikh. I think if we're looking at sort of general attitudes, maybe 30, 40 years ago, definitely in the 90s as well, you know, it wouldn't be uncommon, and I apologize if there's younger viewers out there listening to this. I advise you not to repeat these words, but terms such as, you know, retard, handicapped, spastic, remedial, these sorts of terms which were used to describe people with disabilities. I think, alhamdulillah, now we're seeing a change where people aren't using those terms as much. I think that they are used as a sort of slur at times for certain individuals who might have a disability, or might not even, you know, just as a general insult, unfortunately. And what we're also seeing people move away from those terms just in general use. It was interesting, I was reading something today, and it was in reference to people with autism, but they use the term neurodiverse, which I found quite interesting. Obviously, there's a lot of usage of the term diversity at the moment, so that term neurodiverse is an interesting term to talk about people with different abilities when it comes to people who might have SEN or might have a disability of some sort, which I found quite interesting, Sheikh. Even I think you've mentioned it to me as well a few times, Maulana, where you said that perhaps even in today's terms, the likes of Umar radiallahu anh might have even been classified as being SEN. I wonder if you could expand on that, Sheikh, for the listeners.
Yeah, so you know, when today we talk about all these different terms, can you hear me, Ustad Daniel?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, so I think I mentioned it in the context of today. You know, when we kind of label people, and we label students with special needs, and what that sometimes does is it kind of creates a barrier sometimes for even parents to kind of gain help because of these labels. And sometimes, so therefore labels can be good as well, but at times they can you know, they can be there could be like a wall between help, or a wall between a child and progress and going further. So, for example, with Umar radiallahu anhu, the way Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam channeled his anger in the right direction, right, in the right manner, and how Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam worked with Umar radiallahu anhu, because he was a person who was always truthful. He would say as it is. He wouldn't shy away. He wouldn't sugarcoat something. He would do whatever he had to do and say however it was supposed to be said.
Yeah, there was no black and white.
And in today's terms, exactly, yeah. And with Umar radiallahu anhu, the thing was, if he was here today, they would have said he needs anger management. And Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he had all that in place. He facilitated the companions. He ensured that whichever qualities someone had, or whichever particular worldview or way of dealing with the world someone had, Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was able to not change that or stop that, but utilize it in the best way. And we all know when Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam did this, the ultimate impact that had. I mean, Umar radiallahu anhu, the impact, there was one of my teachers was telling me some time ago that Mahatma Gandhi once said that if the likes of Umar radiallahu anhu, if he ruled for another 10 years, Islam would have spread to every corner of the world. So this is coming from Mahatma Gandhi. And he said this about Umar radiallahu anhu, because of how, when he was able to channel, right, his anger, for instance, when he was able to execute the truth, and then do all of that, he was able to not only just change himself, but he was able to change the world, literally, how it is today. So that's the context that we have to understand how Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he looked at the qualities of the companions, he looked at how he could channel them through, so that they could use those same qualities. Everyone is different. Humans are diverse. We're not going to become homogeneous. We're not going to become monolithic. We're always going to be very, very diverse. So even amongst Muslims, there will be some who are very soft spoken, some who are calm, some who are not so. And that's the beauty in human diversity. So it's not about making everyone the same and standardizing. No, it's about really working on that diversity. I mean, if you go to a park or a garden, and then you walk in and all you see are red roses everywhere, there's nothing else. Okay, they may be beautiful individually, but as a whole, it's not pleasing to the eye. It's not what you're supposed to see in a garden. You're supposed to see diversity, and that's the same thing with the world. And Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, being our prophet, and as we believe him to be the greatest man with the greatest character that ever existed, he was able to recognize that really well, and he was able to work on those individual aspects of all the companions. And that's why you have, for instance, and he made sure that none of these aspects of each individual's character stopped them from Islam in any way. So we have one of the companions of Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who's also indirectly mentioned in the Quran in Madrasah wa Tawalla, where the companion was blind, right? And he was also the mu'adhin of Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's masjid. Okay, he was blind, but he was given, in one sense, one of the most greatest jobs you can have in a mosque, and actually one of the greatest roles in Islam. There's so many virtues for a mu'adhin, and that was given to someone who couldn't see. So that goes to show how Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he overlooked and he went beyond that, and he ensured that these people were given these roles, and these companions were given these roles.
Yeah, I think it's about looking at the individual qualities that a person has, despite perhaps some of their other, I won't say shortcomings, but different abilities, should we say, Sheikh?
Yes, absolutely, yep.
Yeah, just thinking about this topic got me thinking, just generally, thinking about sort of stigmas and how we see people. you know, if you can imagine a scenario where, you know, we're in a supermarket and you see this really, really noisy, loud child who's shouting, or who might be throwing a fuss or having a temper tantrum, for example, and we see a parent struggling, what's our immediate thought? You know, do you have the first thought in our mind is, oh, look at this bad parent, is this bad parenting? Or do you have sort of this form of husnul dhan, if you like, that, you know, could this child have a possible SEN? Could this child have a possible disability that's making it, being, you know, a simple task like going to the supermarket be very, very difficult for them? You know, that was one of the things that sort of came to my mind specifically when talking about this topic.
And just on that point, Sheikh, if I can add,
absolutely,
that I feel, and this is experience from not only our madrasa, but also experiencing from when I was teaching at schools and doing my PGCE, that when it comes to, you know, especially Asian families, I'm Asian myself, so when it comes to Asian families, we kind of see, we have a problem with this term SEN. And I understand why that would be the case. But I think there is another way to think about this. And that is the prophetic model, where we do not see these as, you know, special needs, as in there's something wrong with the child and therefore they need, you know, they need more help. It's not about that. I think the way I look at it is, this world is made for certain type of people. So, you know, there's this really good book. It's called, I think it's called Quiet, and the author's called Susan, I believe, and she's an introvert. Okay, and she talks about in her book that this world is made for extroverts. Okay, and that's why, you know, you have in classrooms when there's group work going on or different activities, it's mostly geared towards the extrovert. So you have, okay, there's group work going on, there's paired work going on, there's whole class work going on, and there's very few cases when there's independent or individual learning going on. And that's what introverts would like. So the world around us is kind of geared towards extroverts, or is geared towards people who see the world in a certain way and is easily accessible for them. And that's why, you know, even when it comes to exams, right? When we have exams, that's a clear indication of the type of exams we have. They're all geared to certain kinds of individual, you know, or groups of individuals who can work their brain in certain ways. Now, this world is made in that particular way, right? However, some of our children, Allah has made them different, okay? And that difference is key for this world to keep on going. And that's the thing. It's almost like a machine, you know, or a car. It has different parts inside it to enable it to work. If we, you know, were to look at a car and say, look, that looks ugly, all those different bits and bobs, let's take some of them out, make them all look the same, or, you know, the car wouldn't work. So in the same way, like for instance with Einstein, and you can correct me here, Sheikh, what special needs, or what the world calls special needs, did he have?
It's thought that he was autistic, but it's neither confirmed
autistic,
or not, as far as I'm aware. Potentially.
Sure. So it's believed that he was autistic. So let's take that as an example. So now with Einstein, so whilst he was at school, he failed in everything. He couldn't write properly, couldn't, you know, put his thoughts out, couldn't express himself as well. He couldn't do any of that. But when he did find himself, and that was after school, right after he finished, when he did get down to it, we actually kind of forget that part of his life where where we would consider him to be special needs. We forget that part, unfortunately. But that is key for us to understand. There are some of our children, and we should count ourselves as blessed to have such children with special needs, because they are unique in the way they think. Right? They may be even more creative than many other people who we call normal, unfortunately, and we use these terms. And they may be much more creative. We need to work around them. We need to support them. Find out, you know, when do they find themselves in their element, right? When do they find themselves in their element? and try and help them with that. So just a second. So for example, Baraka here, she makes it her her worldview to on purpose crush biscuits on my desk over here, and there's crumbs everywhere, and I'm trying to figure out why is she doing that. Right. So but anyway, coming don't do that, it's going to be messy. Okay. So basically what happens is, so coming back to the point that, so with us Asians, we see our children having special needs as a bad thing. We see it like almost like a virus. We see it as a problem. We see it as a mental kind of problem. But that should not be the case. I mean, letting aside, there are mental problems out there. There are cases of people where they have found themselves in depression, and I mean that's all there, and that needs to be treated in the best way possible. But we're talking about the special needs like autism and things like that. So we should not see this as a burden, as a problem. Rather, we should see this as someone who can see and sees the world very differently. These are the people who will make changes to the world. And how do we help them? How do we aid them? How do we facilitate them? I think that is key for our parents to understand. But look, this is not a problem. Yeah.
Just thinking about what you just said there about these are the people who will make the change in the world. So I did know this, but this links into sort of perhaps the next part of our discussion. So Greta Thunberg, the famous climate activist, who was 16, 17 at the time. So she was actually on the autistic spectrum. She's got Asperger's. So she's someone who's made a massive impact in terms of being able to speak about obviously her big passion, which was the climate change. How are we looking after the world? And that one speech that she gave that really made people really think about climate change. That had the potential to literally change the world, Sheikh. She got a Nobel Prize award for it as a result of that. And this is someone who's autistic.
That's a really good point, Sheikh. Very, very good point. Yeah.
And
there are many people out there like that. There are many children.
Absolutely.
I think, and it's the ones that have the parents who understand this at the core. The parents who understand this, and the parents who want to help their children in this, and to facilitate their learning and their way of learning.
Yeah. Again, you touched upon something which I wanted to talk about as well, Sheikh, in terms of sort of the Muslim attitudes towards SEN. But I think just general. I think even if we step away from sort of the Muslim attitudes, I think I told you this as well, Sheikh, about a particular student. I was in a school, and this was a nurse, actually, surprisingly, who was dealing with a child with SEN, part of our department at the time. And she was just talking to another member of staff and was asking her, what SEN, what special needs does this child have? He said, he has autism. And the reaction of this nurse was, of the school nurse or the wife officer, was, oh, that's a shame. And obviously coming from the SN department was like, what on earth? Of course it's not a shame. This is just how they are. This is how they are, and how they are as a person. It's not a shame at all that they had this condition.
And that's very interesting that you're mentioning that, because someone being a nurse needs to understand that even more.
Absolutely.
Because I'm guessing she'll be part of the special needs department. And if this kind of attitude is there amongst, even within special needs departments, then that just goes to show how much more effort, how much more discussion needs to be had, and not just amongst the madrasas and Muslims, but in general.
Even within general terms, yeah, absolutely. So I mean, it's one thing to be thinking about sort of within the Asian community or within the Muslim community. Some of the parents that I've worked with, these are quite well-educated parents, second or third generation in terms of being in this country, have got very good educations, gone to higher education, university, for example, and there's this general reluctance to either accept that the child does have a disability or an SEN of some sort, which on one hand will extremely hinder their child because the parent is not acknowledging the fact that this child does have some special needs. And yet on the other hand, so you've got that side of it, where on that side of the spectrum, if you like, where parents are not acknowledging or refusing to acknowledge that this child might have an SEN or a disability. On the other hand, you've got parents who have gone through the system, know what sort of SEN this child does have, and are really, really fighting to make sure that they get X, Y, and Z, which I think could also be a bit detrimental as well, because if you're always viewing this child within the mind scope of that special needs, you're not viewing them as an individual or as a holistic person, that can be damaging as well. So it's about getting that balance, I think, which is really, really important, not being too extreme on either end of it. I think that's something which we as a community sort of need to work towards, I think. Number one, obviously accepting if a child has a special need or has a disability, and just changing that mindset, just viewing it as something, as them being sort of neurodiverse, if you like, as opposed to being disabled or being different. But changing that mindset in terms of viewing that person as an individual for their own capabilities.
No, I totally agree with that, Sheikh. I definitely agree with that. And just the point, and I was just thinking about what you were saying and trying to always go back to our Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam model, and how, you know, he worked with children in general, right? And obviously at that time they didn't have the kind of advanced technological, scientific, you know, data and advancement that we have today to better understand what these children are going through. They did not have that. So with them, with Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, it was always through kindness, right?
Through mercy.
Through mercy. So with us, we have the extra added benefit of knowing why certain children are doing certain things, and how we can help them further, or how we can facilitate their growth in this world. That's very different through their eyes than it is through someone else's eyes.
So talking about children, Sheikh, like the couple instances, I think it was Hassan Hussein, when Prophet was praying, for example, that they were climbing on top of him, for instance, and that the Prophet never scolded them, or he never admonished him for it. I think the other hadith comes to mind where I think it was a companion or a man who came to the Prophet and I think he witnessed the Prophet kiss a child or kiss one of his grandchildren, and the man was surprised, thinking, "Oh, you kiss children," and the Prophet's response was, you know, "Of course I kiss children." I think you can elaborate on the precise wording, Sheikh, with regards to it.
So could you say that last bit again? You got slightly cut off.
I know. I was saying
the last bit again. You got slightly.
So the companion or the man was surprised that the Prophet kissed a child. And the Prophet was insisting that, you know, of course, that this is sort of from my practice. I'm not sure of the exact wordings of the hadith or the narration.
And it's interesting to. So it's interesting, Sheikh, about that, because because the companion, you know, he was obviously going by the social norms at the time. Where you know, they were more harsh, potentially, you know, or he was just going by what, you know, male chauvinism and, you know, all of that, and you know, he just thought that, you know, this is not how we kind of deal with children. And Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, he was a living example. So he was like a living lecture, you can say. You know, today we go and hear lots of lectures. He taught the companions through his life, more so than his words. If you and I heard this from a scholar a while ago, that if you look at the books of ahadith of Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, more of them are, we saw the Prophet doing this, or we saw him doing that, compared to, you know, qal, or him saying something. So that's an interesting point. But also, you know, when you were talking earlier, the same example came to my mind of you know, Hassan and Hussein radiallahu anhuma, that they came inside the masjid, right? And obviously they're children, so this whole thing about crossing the musallis, that would, and then also you know, they went on for so long on Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam's back, and he you know, prolonged his sajda for extremely long, and he allowed them to stay there. Can you see that kind of facilitation that Prophet ﷺ is providing? Because if you look at it, if a child is on your back and you throw them off, right? Now, there can be a number of problems with that. Right? Just looking at it, what kind of, as a child, I mean, they obviously take in quite a lot through their experience, okay? So now they're seeing someone pray, for instance. They're seeing someone, just say a parent praying, and and I find this myself as well, that only when you're praying, they try and do this even more. Right, they're trying to gain your attention even more.
Gain your attention.
And I see this as a blessing, actually, right? Because they are seeing your movements as something good, right? So they're attracted towards you, right? And in that moment, if you throw them off, or if you push them away, what message does that give to the child through their experiential learning at that time? What message about Islam and Salah and prayer is that instilling in their mind through their experiential learning at that time? And the ways we see what Prophet ﷺ did, he allowed them to stay there. He built that notion that Islam is for everyone and every time. And despite the children, the nature of children at that age is not to understand what's right and wrong in that particular scenario. They don't know. I mean, why do they think they would even touch fire, or they would even touch burning coal? So going in front of someone praying for them is meaningless at that age. And Prophet ﷺ, having understood that, he prolonged his sajda. And then the companion said to him, Ya Rasulullah, why did you do that? And then he explained. Right? And then there's scholars who mention that there were times when he's giving khutbah, or he's giving a lecture, and Hassan or Hussein radiallahu anhuma, one of them comes into the masjid, and he gets off his chair, he gets off his member, and he comes straight down to hug them. If we just that one message, just these two stories, forget everything else. If we just try and instill the principles of that in our lives in different ways, I think that is enough to get and bring our next generation fully onto Islam. Because especially here in the West, right? The way I look at it is, many of us have, we start off, we go to universities, we're not practicing, none of that. Then we start reaching mid-20s and 30s, and then it strikes us, okay, we've got to do something for our hereafter, because this life is not going to last forever. Yeah. Those people who that realization comes to, they are good, because there's some people who go beyond that, and it keeps on going and going. Right? They'll go into their 40s and 50s and 60s, and then the thought comes. But anyway, and when that thought comes, we drastically change our way of living and our way of life. But then we sometimes forget that our children who are growing up with us, we try and enforce our experience onto them. And they can't understand what's going on. They can't understand, why do we have to do this? Because they haven't gone through your experience, they haven't gone through your world, your growth from primary to secondary to college, university. And
that experiential learning that you mentioned, Chef. Yeah.
They didn't go through all of that, and then we're expecting them to understand and change, and then we're forcing certain things. We need to educate our children. We need to tell them why we are doing this, why we think that this is the case and this is true, not enforce. If we look at the life of Prophet ﷺ, we're not talking about ahkamat of the Quran here. We're talking about basic social living amongst us. Even if it does come, when it does come to ahkamat, when initially, drinking wine was allowed, right? It was permitted, and then there was 3 stages before it actually came to a stop. And the first stage was education, right? It was that there are more harms. The basic principle of one of the verses of the Quran was there's more harm in drinking than there is good. So just based off that, many people thought, okay, that's it. The Quran is saying there's more harm, let's stay away from there. And then the drinking continued to the extent that one of the companions drank, and then he prayed, he led the Fajr Salah, and he mixed up the verses of the Quran. And then the second stage came in, that when you are in the state of drunkenness, do not go close to Salah, do not pray. And then again, a whole load of Sahaba, as a result, they kind of moved away from it. And then came the final stage. By that time, they had already educated, and they were constantly educating the companions about this. When the final stage came, that now it's forbidden, there's these scenes, and so the ulama explain how there's traders who went all the way to Syria and far off, and they were coming back with barrels and barrels filled with wine, and then someone comes and announces that alcohol is forbidden. Their faith was worked on to such an extent that they themselves took the tools to break those barrels down. If it happened straight away, it would have been similar to the prohibition that took place in America, which only lasted for, I don't know, a decade or two. And then during that decade or two, alcohol consumption increased as opposed to decreased. And decreased because people were making it in the black market and off the mainstream market, and they were actually drinking more. So this whole I can't remember how we got to this point, but the fact that Prophet
Sallallahu experiential learning,
yeah, experiential learning. So if a child is on our back and we throw them off or push them, or so the other parent comes and kind of drags them away, I mean, then why were the companions, why are Muslims told to read the sunnahs, not to read them in the mosque but read them at home? What was the point of that?
It was the hikmah.
What was what was the hikmah behind it? Is to try and instill this into the children so they can see this. Okay, actually, this is part of our day-to-day thing. That's how the society is built upon. And we saw this with Prophet ﷺ in the masjid with the companion. He once went to a house, and at that time the water bottles or containers used to be made of leather, right? And they used to be hanging up on the ceiling, and people used to come in and then drink from it. So Prophet ﷺ, what he did, he drank from one of those, and then he put some water in his mouth and he squirted it on a child. So there was a child playing around, and he squirted water on the child. And that child from then on became known as the child, or the one the Prophet ﷺ squirted water on.
Yeah.
And he was proud of that, yeah. So that just goes to show how Prophet ﷺ, when it came to individuals with different needs, with children in this particular case, how he came down to their level and became like them in order to be a part of their little world, and then give them that experience. And he was doing this in a time, okay, now some of the stuff is normal. He was doing it in a time when people didn't see the need for any of this with their children, just like the other companion who said, are we supposed to kiss our children? That's an interesting, and it's interesting how it's also come as part of a hadith, because that gives us an understanding of how people were and how societies were at the time. Even for example, amongst the Romans and the Greeks, they had no concept of childhood. So now that's interesting, because a child would be expected to work as hard as an adult. For them, there wasn't much of a difference, and that's why just go visit. We don't have to go far. Victorian Britain. You look at the kind of labor that children were put through, and the kind of sacrifices, the hardships they went through. That Prophet ﷺ was changing. So he wasn't just a mercy for the adults and the males and the women, because there's a lot he did for women as well, but he was a mercy for children. And this is what we need to take from Prophet ﷺ. Every dimension of his life, and how he kind of worked with people of all different ages, and then also different needs as well. How he catered for the needs of the instant where a man, right? A man comes in the masjid and he begins to urinate inside the masjid of Prophet ﷺ. Now imagine at that very moment, the greatest masjid on earth is Masjid al-Nabawi. And you've got like, you still have idols in the haram, and at that time Jerusalem or Masjid al-Aqsa is kind of like that's where the Christians used to come and throw their rubbish. So at that moment, the only real masjid was the Prophet ﷺ masjid. And there someone comes, imagine that there someone comes to urinate, and the Sahaba run towards him to stop him, right? And Prophet ﷺ stops them. Yeah, and Prophet ﷺ, and understandably so, because here's your
I'm understandably furious, absolutely.
This is your most sacred space for Muslims, most sacred, and not only that, it's in an age where you have a prophet, right? It's an age of a prophet, and he's present there in the mosque whilst it's happening. And on top of that, these guys are early Muslims, so their level of their faith is, really high up. And them seeing that, for them, this must have really, really enraged them with anger. And at that point, Prophet ﷺ says to them, no, let him relieve himself, and then we will clear up. So I just to mention a story and an anecdote. I remember I took my daughter once to I think it was kickboxing or something like that, and taekwondo. And then as we were going, there was a building, and there was a man on the side urinating. He was on the side. It was out of way. It wasn't like one of the alleyways. And the lady from the place came and tried to stop him there and there. And it was at that moment I remembered Prophet ﷺ's actions. Right? Obviously, what the person's doing is bad, it's wrong, but we don't know what they are going through. We don't know whether they're homeless or not. We don't know whether they're homeless plus diabetic, for instance.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if someone is diabetic, and if someone's diabetic, and they are not in control in that moment of their diabetes or their sugar levels, they will not be in control of their bowel movements. They will not be able to stop. And imagine that as a scenario, and comparing that anecdote now to that of Prophet ﷺ, of urinating not outside, not in the corner, out of sight, out of way, but inside the masjid, inside the actual space of the masjid. And Prophet ﷺ, he said, no, let him relieve himself. And then after that, he educated them. He explained. So that's how things were working.
Sheikh, your story reminded me of another instance, actually. I think it might have been another blind Sahabi, in coming to the ruling of what to do when you laugh in Salah. And I think the narration was that the blind Sahabi, I think, fell in a ditch or something, and the Sahaba around them, being normal, found it funny. They laughed. But obviously the Prophet, he didn't shout at the Sahaba who laughed at the time. He didn't tell them off. He advised them, and he showed that compassion, and just said, look, the reason why is because your salah breaks, and your wudu can break as well.
That's
my mind.
Yeah, that incident from it's one of my favorite stories. From the Prophet's mosque. That's one thing, but at the same time, it's something that we can take away so much. It's unbelievable. Just the fact that, okay, on one side you have someone, and we can. I like to use a lot of these stories from the life of, and these lessons from the life of Prophet ﷺ, and see how we can play around with them and take out the principle and apply it, for instance, in a classroom setting.
Absolutely, yeah.
So for instance, I mean, just that same story, just to mention the story for some of our listeners who have just come in. There was the Sahaba were praying. Okay, the Sahaba were praying, and in front of the area where they were praying, there was a kind of a ditch, right, or a puddle or something that if someone wasn't careful enough would fall over and fall in the ditch. And there was a Sahabi who couldn't see, who was blind. He came running into the masjid, and he was unable to see. That's why another thing, health and safety is very important. Okay, we need to make sure that this doesn't happen. But he came running in, he didn't see, obviously, and he fell. And the way he fell, the Sahaba couldn't keep their laughter in whilst they were praying. So they began to laugh really loud, right? And then, now in that scenario, imagine you're a teacher. You have a child walks into your class and he falls over really badly and he hurts himself, right? And the whole class laughs, starts, laughing. You as a teacher, if you want to follow the prophetic method, is in this whole case, we need to teach both of them. We need to help both of them. Okay, the one who has fallen, but at the same time, the one who and the people who have laughed.
Yeah.
And as a result of that, it's become a lesson for Muslims all the way till the Day of Judgment. And then it became enshrined in our fiqh that if you laugh so loud, right, that you yourself and the person next to you can hear you laugh, then that not only breaks your salah, it also breaks your wudu. So you have to go and purify yourself again. Think about what you did. You laughed at something so loud, right, that you've had to redo your wudu again. So this is the same thing that we can take, from that incident, very, very, very interesting incident, and reapply it in this case, because we are talking about special needs within the framework of Islam and madrasas.
Yeah.
And see how we can educate. And this takes me back to a very important hadith, which we need to apply in our lives entirely. And that is, when Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, he was amongst the companions, Ridwanullahi alayhim ajma'in, and he said to them that if you see a zalim and madloom, right, two things there, zalim and madloom. Zalim is, you can see the bully, right, or so the oppressor.
The oppressor, yeah.
And the other side you have madloom, right, and
oppressed.
you can call them the victim or the oppressed. And the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said to them, when you see these two, help both of them. Help your brother who's now doing dhulm, and help your brother who is undergoing dhulm. And companion said, Ya Rasulullah, so we understand helping the victim.
Yeah.
We understand that, right? It's logical. But how do we help the zalim? How do we help the oppressor? And Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, is to change them. Is to stop their oppression.
To advise them to stop their oppression, absolutely.
Yeah. Exactly. So for us, and this is what, if you look at all of the prophets, they were always told, doesn't matter how big the sinner is, right? A very interesting, subhanallah, when Musa alayhi salam is being sent to, to work on and to guide and to give da'wah to the Pharaoh, what kind did Allah say to him? Look, go there and smash him out. Right? Go there and knock him out. No, he didn't say that. He said, فَقُولَا لَهُ قَوْلًا لَيِّنًا لَعَلَّهُ يَتَذَكَّرُ وَيَخْشَىٰ. Yeah, that go to him and speak in a very calm, loving tone or a mild tone. Right? Be calm. That maybe he may come back to the faith. So giving the oppressor every opportunity possible. So look, here is something that we could work on together. How could we go forward in this? Right? And you keep on doing that. But then obviously later on, things had to change. The methods had to change, because if the dhulm doesn't stop, then you need to continue by changing your method. Because according to this hadith of Prophet ﷺ, you can't stay in one of two states. You can't stay as an oppressor, and you cannot stay. It's not permissible for a Muslim to stay in the state of oppression as well. Otherwise, Prophet ﷺ would have stayed in Mecca and just taken the oppression and taken it. This is not part of Islam, that you just take oppression. No, both of these sides of the coin, both of these elements need to be destroyed. They both need to be finished. And how do we go about doing that? We learn that from the prophetic method. And again from his life, we're looking at this diversity, on how he's dealing with those zalims and then madloom. How is he dealing with both? And it's very, very interesting. And how much he tries, how much he is trying is unbelievable. The amount of sacrifice he gives, right? It's beyond our understanding. To the extent where he is told by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, إِنَّكَ لَا تَهْدِي مَنْ أَحْبَبْتَ. You cannot guide, you cannot physically guide those who you love. Because he used to cry so much for his ummah and for the ones who were yet to come. And he mentioned this to his companions, that glad tidings are for my brothers. And the companion said, for surely we are your brothers. And the Prophet ﷺ said, no, you are my ashab, you are my companions. My brothers are the ones who will come later on, who will come after me. They would not have seen me or heard me, yet they will believe in me. So this is a glad tiding for us, that we are, we are in a sense the brothers of Prophet ﷺ.
Yeah, absolutely, Sheikh. Sheikh, you reminded me when you were talking about Musa alayhi salam, when he was instructed to go and talk to Fir'aun, the famous dua.
Are you going to tell us of his special needs?
So Musa alayhi salam famously had a stutter, or speech impediment of some sort, which obviously prevented him from communicating as he would have liked. So you can imagine sort of the feeling that he must have had when he was told to go and speak to the biggest oppressor, of all time, if you like, considering he had this stutter, this speech impediment. And obviously he recited the dua, Rabbi Shrah Sadri wa Yassir li Amri. Subhanallah, yeah.
Very important dua, yes. And that's something to we recommend to everyone, I mean, including ourselves.
Absolutely.
And then, when I'm having to do something at times, or if I have to speak to someone, or even give a lecture at times, that's the dua that I would always remember, which was prescribed to Prophet Musa alayhi salam directly. Imagine, would there be a dua greater than a dua that's being prescribed directly by Allah, directly to a prophet? Look at that golden link.
Yeah.
So and I remember one of my teachers, who is a Sufi sheikh as well, and mashallah, he's great. He's one of the scholars in Batli, Mufti Musa Badat, his name is. And he used to also always, I still remember he used to mention in his class that there are many du'as out there, and there's many du'as that teachers tell their students, or they, some of the mashayikh have, had experience with, etc. But he used to mention, my teacher used to mention, that the difference is the nur in the du'a of the Prophet ﷺ is unmatchable. Right? There is no match for the nur that the du'a of Prophet ﷺ has. And imagine du'a like this, which Allah Himself prescribes to Prophet Musa alayhi salam. Unbelievable. And this is what we need to bring into our lives. Yeah, and that's the one. It's based around that special need that Musa alayhi salam had in regards to his speech. That Allah is directly communicating to help him and guide him, in this. And it's really interesting, and the kind of conversation that's taking place between Allah and Musa alayhi salam is interesting, because Musa alayhi salam, right, he was aggressive when it came to the truth. It's very similar to Musa,
very similar to Umar
radiallahu anhu, and we can't say that's bad. No, that's the way he saw the world. However, it needs to be challenged, channeled in a certain way. And what's interesting is that when Allah is telling Musa alayhi salam to speak to Pharaoh, he knew that with Musa alayhi salam's character and his the fiery character that he would go there and totally destroy the Pharaoh. And that's why it's almost like he's being told, look, when you go there, just take it easy with him, speak to him, so it's quite interesting. And so that, I mean, even here, even with prophets, and it's not just with, even with prophets of Allah, right? And who can say that there was anything wrong with Musa alayhi salam? He's
absolutely,
till this day, right? He's remembered till this day, not just by Muslims, but obviously by Jews as well, as their greatest, prophet, and even by Christians as well, right? And many even non-religious people who look at the whole thing in a historical kind of framework. So Musa alayhi salam, right? He had this speech impairment. We should not see this as a problem. That's the thing. Going back to the point.
Going back to it,
us as Muslims shouldn't be looking down upon this. Shouldn't be seeing this as a burden. No, this can be your means to enter paradise. This can be your means to enter Jannah, and Allah has given this to you on a plate. And we're saying no, because remember, entry into Jannah, and as scholars say, Jannah is almost like Jannah is surrounded by thorns.
Yeah.
To get to Jannah, you have to cross those thorns. You have to go through sacrifices. You have to go through some of this, and then and it's a difficult thing to say, but I will say that the ones who Allah loves the most, Allah tries them out the most. If you look at the prophets, they went through the most trials, and they always turn towards Allah. Right? And the Prophet ﷺ's hadith, إِذَا أَحَبَ اللَّهُ قَوْمًا ابْتَلَاهُمْ, that when Allah loves a people, He puts them to the test. Yeah. So do carry on, Sheikh, whilst Barakah is here. do carry on, Sheikh, yeah. And just to remind you, Sheikh, it's 6:24. So we've got just about enough time to wrap up, Sheikh. If you would like to maybe summarize.
So
last few words. We don't have any questions, so yeah.
Oh, there's no questions on YouTube either.
Sorry, Sheikh. Sorry, could you say that again? I think I.
Yes, sorry, Sheikh. I think
I think I
that's fine.
by accident.
There's no question on YouTube at all. Or no comments on YouTube?
So what's your question again, Sheikh?
I was saying that are there no comments on?
I did have a look.
YouTube?
There were a few.
Yeah.
There were some from Yasmin M. It's basically just agreeing with what we said. A really good book, highly recommend. We'll find out what it is. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created us all differently. We have to find or be encouraged by families, community, or society as a whole. And I definitely agree with that. This a lot of times doesn't happen individually, you know, because what might happen is you as a parent individually may understand your child's special needs, right?
Yeah.
You then take them to your brothers or sisters elsewhere, and they don't have that same understanding, which is unfortunate, right? And they will see it from there, and they will be like, no, let me sort this out. Let me sort this problem out. But no, right? We need to see this as a whole, as a community, as one. It's very, very true.
Yeah, it's very good. Yeah.
And then, so she's saying that community or society as a whole, to what their strengths and qualities are. They are an encouraged discussion. Yes, absolutely. So even, you know, when we are going to relatives and stuff, this is something to talk about. This is definitely something to talk about, because we have children who are classified by our system today as children with special needs.
Yeah.
So what that would now mean is that every one of our families will have children who are classified or who are labeled with some sort of special needs.
Yeah.
And that now means that should be a focal point of discussion, not just for parents, children as well. Because what's going to happen is, if other children don't understand the needs, then the whole thing about bullying comes into it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Which is very unfortunate, very, very unfortunate. And we need to really go back to Prophet ﷺ's teachings and really think about, you know, the love that we need to have for each other. It's very important that we show kindness and not, you know, throw aside people or say, oh yeah, that so-and-so always does that, or so-and-so is always like that. But try and understand each other's, try and come together, right? And sit around a table and talk about it, which something that Prophet ﷺ always recommended. Right? He's always recommended this. Even, for example, you know, even in the Quran, for instance, if there's issues between husband and wife, you solve it together first.
Yeah.
You keep working at it, you keep working at it. Sometimes it may become so big that it won't work. So certain steps are given, and then comes the time to bring an external person. And what do? You come around the table again. So he always comes round to speak about it with each other. That's key, with an open mind.
Yeah.
We shouldn't enforce something on anyone else. You know, our own worldview. Oh, this certain thing worked in the olden days and everything was fine, and therefore let's apply it now. No, it doesn't work like that. And our Prophet ﷺ was a clear example of that. Very clear example. Even with the Sahabi who said, I didn't know that we were supposed to, you know, kiss our children in effect. And Prophet ﷺ saying, no, we should. And he's doing this and he's talking about this. And even when it came to the society at the time, when the companions migrated to Medina, right? And obviously being patriarchal society, they came to complain to Prophet ﷺ that, look, you know, in Mecca, our wives were under our control. But in Medina, you know, they've been influenced by the women of Medina. And then Prophet ﷺ explained to them, no, the best of you are those who are best of you towards your other half or your women folk. So this is definitely part of that. I'll just go back to this as we are wrapping up. They are a gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not a curse. I think that's incredible. That's a very important thing. And it's actually sad that we've had to actually come out and mention this. We've actually had to come out and say, no, that they are not a curse. Astaghfirullah. Yeah. And had a notion like this been brought to Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he would have been very saddened by this, extremely saddened by this. So that's key. Okay, Ustada Taiba says she agrees. Ustada Atifa, mashallah, very insightful. Jazakallah khair, barakallah. The book you recommended. The book I recommended. I can't remember at this moment.
Oh, I think you're talking The Introvert.
Ah, right. Okay, so what I will inshallah do is let me just open this up now and just put the link up. Is it so, Ustad Yasmin, if you can just let me know if you are talking about the book about introverts. If you can just confirm that, We'll just look for the link to that book.
Sheikh,
And also, rather than starting with the book, there's some really good. Yeah, can you hear me, Sheikh?
yeah.
Can you hear me?
Continue your point. Yeah, can you hear me, Sheikh?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, so I thought we got. I thought we stopped. Yeah, so I can hear you. Yeah, I'm just looking for the link now. Yeah, the book is.
That's fine.
Cool.
I was going to say, what
I
you're looking
would
for the link.
recommend though is so her name is Susan Cain, right? And yeah.
I think whilst you're looking for the link, and whilst we're wrapping up, I think it'll be remiss of me to not mention that last week was World Autism Week. And in our madrasah last year, I think all of our lessons, Islamic studies, had some section dedicated to World Autism Week. So there's a little bit of teaching going on with all the teachers to educate the students about what autism is or was. So if anyone's listening, I think I did a talk to one of the classes as well. If anyone's interested, what we did last year for World Autism Week, might find it quite interesting, inshallah. And if anyone's interested in the book, and I think Sheikh, you recommended this book to me, The Reason I Jump was an excellent book about autism. The book written by a 11 or 12-year-old Japanese boy who had quite severe autism, but he was able to communicate his thoughts and about why he sees the world in his particular way. So I highly recommend reading that book as well. It's a very easy read as well.
Yeah, absolutely. The Reason I Jump. Yeah. I was reading somewhere that there's now, I think they've made the film, which should be out soon as well. What I'm also doing is just putting up a link to a TED talk by Susan Cain, which is where I found out about her book, and I was really taken aback by her worldview around introverts and the world being therefore, it's kind of designed by humans and for extroverts. Almost everything, our offices, the way our desks are laid out.
Yeah, absolutely.
A lot of the architecture, it's almost like it's an extrovert's world. So that's what it is, and she explains that. And I've just put up the link to a TED talk by Susan Cain, which is only like a 20-minute talk, but I would definitely recommend it. It's also been transcripted. It's available on that link in 47 different languages. So if you can't, if anyone wants their parents, because this is something that everyone needs to be a part of. It's also about Arabic, as Farsi, quite a few languages. Looking for Urdu, there's no Urdu there, unfortunately. But yeah, so do have a look at this video. Definitely recommend all our parents do watch this, because again, many of us are extroverts, many of us are introverts, and then even within that, there's a scale, isn't there? Some would be like extreme extroverts, some would be on the extreme side of being introverts, and many would be in between. So that's something else to also look into, inshallah. And anything else? I think that's about it.
Okay, fantastic.
Yeah, The Reason I Jump. Yeah. So yeah, definitely 2 books for today. One called Quiet by Susan Cain, and the other one is The Reason I Jump. If you're not good, if you're not really into reading books, just look out for the film. I think it's coming out, or it's already come out, or should be out soon. Either one of those. But there was an article recently. But it will be interesting to look at The Reason I Jump. I definitely recommend that book as well.
Yeah. Okay. Just to wrap up, Sheikh, if any of the viewers or listeners have any questions or thoughts that might come into their mind as the week progresses, please do send them in, inshallah, and then we can include that in our discussion for the following weeks.
Absolutely. There's nothing that's come in so far, but if there are any questions, please do let us know. We'll be interested to hear, and then we can see what we can do and how to respond as well.
Yeah.
Okay, just I'd like to take this opportunity again to thank and say Jazakallah khairan to Ustad Danyal for giving us his valuable time from his work that he's doing. Jazakallah khairan for that. And inshallah, we'll see you all next week on Monday at the same time at 5:30. Do try and come on to Zoom because you can engage a bit more. And if anyone wants to share their ideas, if someone, for example, who's an introvert, and you want to, I mean, this is a bit of a contradiction, but if you want to come forward and talk to us, or if you find on chat much more easier, there's your way of expressing yourself.
100%.
There's no harm in that. Yeah. So jazakallahu khairan, everyone. Jazakallahu Ustad Daniel. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.